Senator for Connecticut.
Mr. President, if I could just briefly build on the remarks of Chairman Reid. Never before has such a small number of senators stood in the way of this large a number of nominees. The impact of this constant effort to hold up nominees to the State Department and the Department of Defense is to compromise the national security of this nation, to try to rob from this administration, from this president, the ability to govern and to protect this nation. And I will just remind my colleagues that what comes around goes around. I know right now some Republicans may delight in the president not having any personnel necessary to run agencies because of this record number of holds that are put on nominees by the Republican minority. But there will be a Republican president someday. There will be a Republican majority someday. And a handful of Democratic senators will use the same tactics that are being used today to essentially rob from this administration its right to do the job it was elected to do by the American people at great risk to American national security. So my prerogative on this is that we should just change the rules and make it less easy for one senator to hold up nominees that are supported by 90 to 95% of us, make it easier to proceed to a vote on nominees. The senator from Missouri wants to vote no on this nominee or others. That's his right. But we should come up with a process by which the entire administration is not ground to a halt by 1 or 2 of 100. We should just decide to do that. Because today this is hamstringing a Democratic president, but let me guarantee you it will hamstring a Republican president someday as well. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to provide remarks in support of Senator Sanders' resolution that we will consider later today. I have come to the floor many times to talk about the war in Yemen. I think I first came to the floor during the Obama administration when very few people even knew there was a civil war in Yemen that the United States was participating in. But let me just say again what I hope is common knowledge. The war in Yemen has been a national security disaster for the United States. It has now been ongoing for 8 years, and by no metric has this war accrued to the benefit of U.S. national security. And let me just give you a few windows into why this is true. First and foremost, this is a humanitarian nightmare. The world's worst humanitarian disaster is in Yemen today. The UN says that 66% of the country's population, and by the way, this is not a small country, right? This is a country of 30 million plus people, right now survive only because of emergency aid. 23,000 airstrikes have been launched just from 2015 to 2021, killing or injuring 18,000 civilians. 18,000 civilians, 10,000 of them children, have been hit, killed, or maimed by airstrikes. There's a humanitarian nightmare inside Yemen today. That does not accrue to the benefit of the U.S. security. Why? Because Al-Qaeda and ISIS operate inside Yemen. And when there is this kind of misery, when there's this kind of devastation, that's a breeding ground, that's fertile recruitment material for the terrorist groups that are organizing against the United States and are seeking to recruit those who are looking for answers. Al-Qaeda, ISIS are growing stronger, and the misery in Yemen is growing deeper. And at the same time, Iran is growing more influential. This was not, at the outset, a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia supports the old regime in Yemen, and Iran, who has been partners with the rebel group, the Houthis, that control the capital, Sana'a, has become more embedded as time goes on with the Houthis. As the war lingers, as it persists year to year, Iran becomes more influential, has more power inside Yemen. And so if our interest in the region is to decrease Iran's power, then every year that this war persists, Iran gets more powerful inside Yemen. And so if we care about the growth of Sunni terrorist groups, if we care about the growing influence of Iran, if we care about saving people from misery, destitution, and death, then we have to do everything in our power to wind down this war. What benefit to us, to the Yemeni people, to the Middle East region, for this war to persist year after year after year? Now, in 2019, we considered a similar resolution. It passed both the House and the Senate, a resolution to end U.S. participation in the Yemen war. It was vetoed by President Trump. We didn't have enough votes to override the veto. Let's be honest, this is a very different moment than 2019. Why? Because President Biden has pursued a very different policy than President Trump. President Trump backed the Saudis. He, for a long time, refueled Saudi planes that were dropping bombs in Yemen. He sold them massive amounts of weapon. He embedded American forces with Saudi forces to help pick targets. President Biden ran on a promise to end U.S. support for the war in Yemen. And by and large, he made good on that promise. The Biden administration does not sell Saudi Arabia weapons to be used in the Yemen war. They don't refuel the planes midair. They don't help with targeting. They don't help with intelligence. But Senator Sanders has correctly identified some lingering lines of cooperation between the United States and the Saudi-led coalition that does continue to help them perpetuate this war, including the work that we do to help maintain the Saudi Air Force. This is a different moment than 2019. We should give President Biden credit for pursuing a very different policy. The facts on the ground are different as well. There has been, for long stretches during the Biden administration, ceasefires in Yemen, ceasefires that we did not see during the Trump administration. The Saudis, to their credit, have been more interested in peace during the Biden administration than they ever were during the Trump administration. That is, I believe, in part because they don't have a blank check from the U.S. regime any longer. In fact, as we stand here today, it is the Houthis that are the primary impediment to peace, not the Saudis. Now, the Saudis' interest in peace and de-escalation, it comes and it goes, but today as we speak, it is in fact the Houthis who need to make the commitments necessary to sit at the table and find a path to permanently end the fighting in Yemen and find a way for everyone in Yemen, Houthis included, to be able to live in peace, to have a government that everyone can call their own. And so why support this resolution if President Biden has pulled most all of our support for the war, if the primary barrier to a peaceful solution today is the Houthis? Well, I think it's pretty simple. I think we've seen the impact that we have when we withdraw our blank check. And I think so long as there are any lines of effort that the United States is involved in that continue this war, we are weaker as a nation. Practically, we are weaker because every day this war persists, Iran gets stronger, and the potential for Sunni extremist organizing becomes stronger. But we are also just morally weaker because for us to be a participant in any way, shape, or form in a war with this kind of misery, it really shapes the way that people think about us in the region and around the world. And so I'm here to support Senator Sanders' resolution and urge my colleagues to vote for it. Not because I believe that this is the same moment as 2019. It's a different moment. But I think it commands the United States to send a very clear message. And our message is that this war has to end. The United States should not be involved in this war. Not a little, not a lot. This war, every day it persists, makes us less safe, and it harms our credibility. And the Senate, I would argue, should pass this resolution. I yield the floor.